Hello, welcome to another Glasshouse again. So today we've got a slightly small crew. It's a bit too early for most people to join us. So there's myself, Silas, Dave Itel, and JD Work. Over the last couple of weeks, some exciting things have happened that we hope to touch on during the discussion. So obviously these are fairly freewheeling, so it's not guaranteed we'll get to all of them. But the sort of the big ones that we think are interesting to look at are the new cyber power ranking of nations, which you know joins the Belfair Center's ranking from a little while ago as a terrible idea that doesn't make any sense. There's the print nightmare, where we don't want to sort of discuss the bug itself, but rather what it reveals about ODay life cycles. And then the very recent announcement that Russia is using infrastructure to do hacking, and they have a CI/CD um, hacker pipeline, I guess. So, right, I guess, Dave, do you want to start us off with something?
You want me to talk because I'm angry in the notes, don't you?
You're going to go, yeah. So for everyone that doesn't have access to the document, they've literally got access to the points that we want to talk about, and he's like doubled the word count with ranting in the last 30 seconds. So I think he has some opinions.
I have some opinions. I'm known for having opinions, but one of the opinions that I have is, first of all, I'm extremely annoyed. I listened to the Ann Neuberger, Dmitry Alperovich thing this morning again for the second time. And one of the things that she said was, she's like, this was a big success. We coordinated with industry, public-private partnership, blah, blah, blah. And we got the number of exposed Exchange servers down from 100,000 to 10,000 in a week. And I was like, who cares? Right? Like, what a ridiculous threat model to think that reducing the number a week later matters at all when it takes, and I'm just going to say, maybe 20 minutes for someone with, like, say, a script. Okay, maybe 6 minutes.
No, hold on. This is the perfect thing also to note as well, is with a capability like what was described by the NSA the other day, the speed of time it takes to do a full internet scan is much less. For reference, if you were to do it with about, say, 200 machines, it will take you about 20 minutes. So if you have, say, 1,000, 1,100, which Microsoft reported, that number starts to get pretty quick.
All right, Silas, but is 20 minutes longer or not as long than a week?
Well,
it's a fair point.
You say that.
This is what annoys me so much, is I'm like, the Chinese had this bug for who knows how long before the stupid thing was patched. After the patch came out, you have to assume everyone has it. Who cares what happens a week later? It might as well be a decade later. The whole idea that this is the metric we're on blows my mind as a success story. It made me very angry, as you can see.
This is the fallacy of vulnerability reduction as a mechanism for deterrence by denial, because you're not actually denying the capability option.
Well, also, they're assuming every attacker is at the lowest tier, right? Like, what if someone took the 20 minutes, owned your box, has domain admin now, because Exchange runs as domain admin, right? Has infiltrated your domain server and is now sitting there silently as a driver somewhere that you have no, like,
if they forget their password and they can't use their backdoor and they have to re-exploit a week later, they won't be able to. So
the web shell thing was a complete. I was like, just who cares? It's like noise. It's just noise, right? So this is what, like, I was like, we are at the level right now, like, and I was talking to Dimitri. He's like, what did you think? I was like, we're at the level right now where we should have been 10, 15 years ago. And so if you're not, like, visibly upset at that, then I just feel like something's mismatched. Anyway, so that's why I was ranting in the document, was because it makes me visibly upset to be this far behind.
So I just wanted to bounce on that, which was that if things are a week behind with like a very public ODay drop, or like a public bug release, right? If you look at like how long ransomware takes, it's like this is a fairly streamlined professional commercial process. It's 24 hours from when they get access to when they start asking for money because they've done everything. And most of that time is spent doing search and analysis to find out what data they can use to extort you. So even by the standards of like denying access to commercial cyber criminals, 1 week is useless, right? Like that's not a period of time that will buy you anything anywhere.
So just actually as a note from that talk, the Dimitri and webinar from earlier this week, which I thought was fascinating. I truly think that one of the things that we could probably get the most value out of these days is instead of expanding public and private partnership, is literally just building a giant call center that every single security org can use to notify victims at scale and speed. Like when you have 100,000, if they say we know 100,000 like different entities are vulnerable, how long would it take to call every single one? Like, and it also includes the research time to identify a POC and like a contact at the like specific entity. Like that's where I think that if they
also by but bouncing on something you said earlier, which is that these people, like the victims in this case, or the people who are exposed, they don't know you from Adam when you call up. You're just like, hi, I'm some random guy. You're exposed on the internet. You should run these commands on your computer, right? Like that's not necessarily a winning strategy for securing the internet.
I mean, this used to be the core mission of CertCC, and I mean, is inherently a governmental function that would scale.
Right, and by having it from somewhere that people can go, okay, like I'm gonna call, like give me the name that you're calling from, CERT. Okay, I'll call you back, and then you can verify that it is actually CERT that's calling you, rather than trusting someone who just rings you up. Right? You can authenticate that you are getting the correct information, that someone is actually doing it. So if you add that layer of authentication by having a real group actually handling this rather than just individuals, you increase security overall for everyone in every possible way, which is probably why it won't happen in exchange for another document about public-private partnerships. And
but let's talk about Print Nightmare, which is the other side of the story, right? Like the same brainworm of like, as long as you've patched, you're okay, except, okay, the patch is broken in most of the cases, but that's okay now too, as long as you've done an extra configuration step. Just do it in time. This theory, like, oh, just do it in time, as opposed to the idea that, oh, anyone in my organization could have been domain administrator for the past year, because the Chinese have had this bug at least for a year that we know about. At least.
Well, it's
I don't know. It's after last November. Like, I'm just guessing. All right, like they were going to submit it to Tianfu.
I think it's after last Tianfu, and it's for next Tianfu. So it's between last November and now. So it's
what is your estimate?
Quite a year, but
Greg, what is your estimate?
I think they had it for like 7 months. Like,
is that longer than 20 minutes?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you're counting, because 7 is less than 20.
True.
Yeah, I mean, what math-based standard are we using here? Are we operating on the base 10 system, or could we create our own? Because they'll design
this is what boggles my mind, is that you're telling me that if I run a multinational that has an office in China, that has users in China, whose domain extends to China, that anyone in China could have been on my domain controller for the last 7 months. You're telling me that it's okay now for me just to patch and move on with my life instead of conducting the world's biggest forensic exercise.
Well, there's all sorts of other things with that as well. Like, this is obviously not the only bug, right? So whatever the patch does, we have no idea that there aren't other ODAs still there. You cannot.
No, he's explicitly said he has a bunch of ODAs. Yeah. He's explicitly said no domain controller is safe. What do you do next?
Well, the former gentleman, the gentleman formerly at Microsoft, was talking about their problems in variant analysis that led to this. So we know that there is more underlying the things to poke at on this particular problem.
So
that's just this one.
It's also the thing of like printing in general is just one of the worst areas of computing. Nobody likes printers. Nobody likes anything that interacts with printers. And it's the same across every operating system as well. Like,
Yep.
oh,
No, there are no good printers.
Well, and let's
So,
be fair, it's because the printer companies have worked very hard to turn literal printer ink into diamond.
Yeah.
well, I mean, at least I mean, from the Linux side, like it's one of those things where there's no drivers and there's no support, so it's really a lot of hacks. And like when I'm pulling drivers that somebody's written off GitHub to try and like get a label printer working, like that's an unsafe time.
Yeah.
But
You have
that's
to
just
read
the state of the
a
area.
gist, and but so like this is the other thing is like you'd think, okay, so like how do we deal with this? We disable the print spooler drive, like we just disable the service, and like you cannot actually do that because there's a lot of business processes that rely on it, like AutoCAD stuff. It doesn't work if you don't have that running, right? So there are businesses that are like literally unable to protect against this embedded vulnerability.
Well, and all of the calls from all the various proprietary document handling solutions and that generate these PDF functions that then spit something out for an email. But yeah,
I mean, we could also, there's all of that, and then there's the fact that point of sale all uses printers as well. And first, it's a fleet of Windows XP machines with TeamViewer running, and so now with this, yeah, I'm really glad the EMV conversion happened a few years ago. Where we went to the chip cards.
but I mean, this case gives us a great insight into how long have we to the corroding nature of vulnerability intelligence at the moment. How long have we been talking about the Tianfu cruise? How long have we been talking about the fact that there's this incredibly disruptive new source of talent that is aligned in a very different way that we're not used to dealing with in this ecosystem? It's been out there for some time, but it's hit a critical mass. It's hit this very unusual moment. And we are not capitalized for that mission.
So there's a lot of really interesting things about Tianfu because it reveals like the breadth and the depth of the Chinese exploit developer community, and it's absolutely huge, right? And the fact that they can put together essentially a code to own and have a larger number of internal teams competing than the international code to own has. And
I won't even say larger number. I'll say higher quality as well.
I would say both. It's like,
I would say both.
Yeah, quantity and quality. It's like these guys dominate, and they dominate in volume.
And it's a quantum leap. This is what I've been trying to get to people's heads, is when your random independent Alibaba researcher is dropping iOS chains on the Tianfu Cup, then you have a problem because your teams aren't doing that. Because you have a different incentive structure, whatever. It's just like, it's not a throwaway to you. You know what I'm saying?
It's also one of those things where, like, fundamentally the understanding of these things and them as a capability has been neglected for years. Like, there's the Pwn-to-own competitions, and it feels like for a long time they're kind of dominated by a select number of like different groups, and they were a bit less successful. But the thing is like the Chinese version has just been absolutely amazing to see it rise.
Well, in the West, we carved off the highest end talent into very remunerated positions for certain shops. That dynamic undoubtedly exists on the other side, but there's also a much wider, very hungry community who sees this as a meal ticket. I mean, the frustration at losing at this bug collision and losing out the opportunity to submit to Tianfu was palpable in the discussion, partly because what that means long term, especially when effectively you have behind all of this the undoubted presence of certain Chinese services that are seeking to dispense favor, or areas in which individuals would be very happy to receive that favor in return for this unique bit of talent that they can muster for this mission.
So I have zero doubt that team will be able to replace this capability. One of the things that this gives us some insight into, I think that's quite interesting, is that first of all, it shows how like zero-day development is not like a thing that you do sort of just in time. It's not a JIT thing, right? These guys started doing their analysis a long time ago. So they've had a significant amount of time to work on it. They've had their O-Day ready to go, and they're planning this for the end of the year, right? And yet they still have it ready very, very early on. And, you know, if you read the academic literature, it tends to say things like, oh, well, you know, people don't want to have O-Day for long periods of time because they tend to like deteriorate and die.
What
And,
academic
like,
literature?
Like all these people that fucking talk about how like O-Day doesn't last. Like O-Day is like a thing that expires. And to a degree, it's true. Like you don't stockpile fruit, right? Like that's not a thing that you can do. But on the other hand, that's not really how it works.
I think
because,
also what you see in academic literature that annoys you personally is massive oversimplification of the issues. Right? Just
Oh,
just
God.
truly colossal generalization that
You know
would
what
make
this
should
whole
make you
thing
ashamed.
is prisoner's dilemma. If we just looked at O-Days as a tit for tat opportunity.
You're just trying to trigger me. I know you are. I know
Actually,
troll.
when it comes to arsenal management, the majority of the majority of the academic literature is still postured against the idea that it's not something that's just sitting in a silo like a nuclear weapon or in a bunker like a JDAM. And that conversation is about as far as most folks get. When I go ranting off on my 3 slides of densely packed with factors for analysis and start talking about shadow of the future and operational decision making and all of these other things, folks get a little lost quickly because they've never had to make these decisions. They've never had to see how these decisions play out.
And I think possibly, and something that's a little bit of a different paradigm, like that you've touched on, is that arsenal management and talent management start to blend. And that's not something I've seen in any of this literature. And that's something that I think we're starting to like try to raise to consciousness with the Tianfu discussion, with a lot of these discussions. It's like there's a blend here and it's not modeled properly.
Because humans are messy and awkward and no academic wants to talk about them.
Yeah,
No, they do surveys.
It's interesting in a way, like how it maps as well, because you'll get people who like, they will do iOS, right? But the thing is, you can't say, okay, so they have the iOS guy, which means, we have to mark him only as iOS. He may have come from Windows and be brought into a Windows team once he's done his iOS work, and then he becomes like, even though you have to sort of focus and really like target in on just one thing, people can switch. It's not like a forever thing. Like, if you look at a lot of the classic hackers that came from Unix and moved to Windows and then moved on to mobile.
Are you thinking Lorian of TISO?
Oh no, that's the guy that he stole all of Stefan Esser's work.
Yeah, I believe he is a plagiarist. That's true.
Yeah. Or maybe it was Stefan Esser stole all of his work. Anyway, it's very confusing between the two. So, there's a lot of sort of copyright stuff going on between them, and but no, I mean, I was thinking even of Mark Dowd, right? I mean, he was like absolute Unix wizard, then absolute, Windows wizard, and then started doing mobile stuff. And that's not an uncommon pathway for these, like.
Well, I also think there's a confusion here because a lot of U.S. industrial style work happens where you sort of start getting someone to salami slice their capability, right? So they become a specialist and they stay a specialist in a very small area. Whereas when you looked at the original 90s hackers, they were often much more fluid with their technical skills. Anything from writing the kernel implants to conducting the operations to moving through exploitation paths of different architectures. So I just think that people model one or the other. They try not to model both, when the real world is, it's much more complex. Arsenal management is about both your current capabilities and how you're building your future capabilities and teams. And I guess this is why it ties into like understanding the strategic issues with Print Nightmare and with the exchange bug, and how do you handle an adversary of that class. I don't think we're even at the phase where we can explain the strategy to how to handle an adversary of that class yet. I think Anne's doing the best she can. So I don't mean to come down hard on her at all. She's trying to get caught up. but we are nowhere near like where we need to be even 10 years ago.
Well, not just getting caught up yourself, but steer the entire machinery of this government thing to make that happen.
Right. Yeah. Like,
I mean,
this is not a critique of her skills at this. This is a critique of art. Total package. Yeah.
And you know, this is also that classic changing tech ecosystem. So Win 11 is going to have Android baked under the hood. All of the Android exploitation skill set now will transfer directly into this environment in some fashion. So this bleed over is going to break everyone's nice little analytic buckets, and we're going to see some probably unexpected and very surprising things in the next 6-9 months.
Oh, didn't you hear also Google's going to phase out the APKs?
Oh, that's fun.
Right.
Go to app
everyone's
bundles.
keys. Yeah. So actually, the integration of Android into Windows is kind of interesting because it suggests that people who have been doing Android exploitation will be able to now target 2 different platforms, like mobile and desktop. So that will actually improve your coverage if you've got a good team.
So I'm really excited for this feature to come in Windows 11 because I really want to demonstrate an ability to use an Android rat to drop Mirai on a Windows box. Like, I just absolutely want to see this happen.
Well, the nice thing is we will finally perhaps get enough telemetry across the Android malware ecosystem to have reasonable reporting from threat intelligence providers.
Mobile's tough.
Yeah. No. So that, you know, based on just what Dave was saying about like how arsenal management in a way is team management. Yeah. Like one of the things I think is interesting is if you look at teams that are comparable to what the Chinese have, you have to pick Project Zero. Right? Google is the only company that has an ODA focused team, and they've got like what 10 people or something. Like it's not a particularly big team. I'm gonna say 10. I don't know the actual number, but if you look at like the teams that are being fielded at Tianfu, like each of those is close to like they come from companies that have close to 100 people in their teams, right? Like Alibaba has probably got a bigger P0 than Google. I know that Qihu's got 100 people. Tencent has 100 people. Baidu has 100 people.
And
again, they're only doing this.
To do this to you again. These are 100 amazing people.
Absolutely.
And it's not just like, these are 100 world-class experts. And that's something that's very hard to get across to the wider, even the incident response people don't have the like built-in understanding of exploitation that would allow them to judge the sort of art level. I don't even know how to say it, right? Like the same way there's like reverse engineers that I'm like, okay, I think he's good, but there's no way for me to judge he's like X or Y good. But with some of these people, I'm like, that's just art, right? Like it's world-class Michael Jordan level.
In a way, what's really interesting about that as well is just like with art, when you have a community of people, like the more people you have like putting their creativity in, the better everyone gets, right? So if you took one of these world-class people and stuck them by themselves somewhere, they would have a plateau that they could reach. But you give them access to 99 other people at a similar level, but with a different approach or different skill set, you get massive multipliers for all of them, right? It's like exponential. So simply having teams of this size with this quality of person, you cannot really comprehend it as just being like, oh, okay, so it's like they've got 10 Project Zeros.
Like it's also important to note as well that P0 is unbelievably well respected in the community and idealized. And the thing is there's many people who are like entering the industry, learn about P0, see P0, and like look to them. And it's like, I want to be that. And I want to get to that level so I can get higher and continue to grow. And like they become an inspiration as well and a rallying post. And like they are these sports teams of this this world. So
well, there's already a natural inclination in the Chinese hacker ecosystem towards that. I mean, they had that very personalized first generation, taught the next generation. I mean, everyone knew the Glacier, everyone knew Toonkeeper. Everyone knew these folks that are now very senior in the ecosystem, and how close you were to their original instructional paths, original crews were important.
I mean, if you were listed on their blog, you were made. So, like, yeah.
I think there's like an understanding of the scope of the threat that you get that I think we all have. But what's not no one has communicated how you would address anything similar to this. If the only solution you have is please patch faster. Like the idea that you would say please patch faster to me is a failure. If that makes any sense.
Well, so Dave, this comes back to why I was talking about the timing and how long like it would take to conduct mass exploitation of it. Because the thing is when we are giving like in the recommendations, if you're saying like and evaluating how long between the patch vulnerability was released and patch came out, like it's important to know like a week is not an acceptable time frame anymore. Like it may have been at a point when it was possible, like when broad exploitation took an hour for the top tier talent, like top tier capabilities, like sure, maybe you could try and have like make sure you're patched in a week. But the thing is now we are in a state where you need to be patched within a time frame that I don't think people are comfortable with.
It's an unreasonable time frame.
It's absolutely
unreasonable. It's an unreasonable time frame. That indicates that patching is not the solution, that you need other risk mitigations. To Anne's credit, a lot of the strategy involves placing endpoint protection everywhere at every intersection. I think there's a cost to that analysis that we're going to have to bear that's much higher than what organizations can bear. And so that would indicate that at some point you become the fire team. Like you have to have a local firehouse that people can rely on, that you are bearing the cost as a government for all of these protective measures. And we have not reached this sort of level of discussion yet.
I think it's also related to, because I remember the old discussions about like the big internet kill switch that they just flip a lever and like, oh, we're safe. And the thing is like, it would be fascinating if that discussion had, instead of been approached as like, we're gonna flip a big switch and save our internet. But if it was, we're actually building a firewall. That's all it is. We're not doing it to like spy on your Pornhub habits. We're just using it to block IP addresses. And we'll even make it transparent. But when these mass like exploitation things happen, like central coordination, there's identified attackers, like they stop attacking. It'll stop some exploitation. But
the stop attacking isn't a defensive great firewall. The stop attacking dynamic, this is where we come into with the counter cyber operations issue. Particularly when you're looking at things like high volume, automated, cloud native offensive operations infrastructure that rapidly incorporates things for these land rush dynamics. We had visibility on several clusters of exceptionally high volume activity during the halving. The fact that was not, this is where the private sector hackback frustration becomes evident, because when private sector actors realize that they could rapidly deliver effects against those nodes and change the adversary's ability to work in these constrained timelines. Again, it's not meant to change the entire fight. It's not meant to escalate. It's not, and again, there are escalatory pressures that come from this. On the other hand, it buys time to let those defensive things happen, because the timescales don't work otherwise. And we're not having rational discussions around what it means to think about that. Now, again, knowing what Halfname was, knowing what the industry believes, and again, whether government will choose to concur with that or not remains to be seen, but that is not a trivial step. That is also not something, okay, you necessarily want everyone in the private sector going out and trying to do uncoordinated. Having said that, the government is abdicating that responsibility. And when they're deciding to work across a different space of that, instead of looking at that attacker equation, there is discussion that they want to reach into individual private boxes to make changes. That's a very different place, and so not where government ought necessarily be focused. Personal view.
One of the things I find like what I find really strange about this is that, like you look at a mass hacking event, and like to me, as JD is suggesting, the responsible, like rational thing is where are the nodes that are being used to attack? Let's take those out. And I think a lot of people would follow that thinking, but rather the government is doing why don't we just reach into everyone that's been hacked and fiddle around with their boxes?
So the
And
thing is,
we will have no way of telling people who that was in particular, no way of providing information to people doing monitoring about what we actually did, like, because it's all secret. We don't want people to know what we did because it's classified and, private stuff. However, we are going to go out and just, fuck with everyone's stuff.
the cleanup effort is still something that I'm greatly frustrated by, and I have a stack of FOIA message or letters to go out for it because I'm continuing to be upset about it. I think it was like a very bold play, and I absolutely appreciate like seeing those types of bold steps. But the thing is as a defender, I need to know that thing. I need to know what IP address came from. I need to know indicators, and it's not just that I need to know it. Because if somebody was to be like, "Hey, listen, we can help. Like, we'll get you those details so you can help protect your customers," that's fine. But that's still not what I need. This is going to sound slightly. I need the ability to tweet that also. It can't be something that's so secretive that I can't pass it to people. And I like not intentionally saying like I can tweet it out, but I need the ability to make assessments about where I can distribute it in order to help. Like,
well, you need to be engaged. Like part
Yes.
of persistent engagement is engaging Silas and people like Silas.
Yeah.
And
I
I
don't
think
the discussion
that,
was always it was 2/3 relationships, 1/3 ops. The relationships piece matters.
And actually, I'll even take a second thing as well. And I was seeing us doing this something as well. Is like you grew up when you were describing like fighting and dealing with the half name stuff. Like it's really easy to continue to be like, well, if we're going to go and try and bat the half name stuff where they were doing it like in this model, like we're batting towards solving like the low problems, which is again that coming around and cleaning up after instead of trying to tackle the top tier threats. And the thing is like switching slightly to the like NSA piece about Fancy Bear conducting brute force attacks with Kubernetes infrastructure. Yeah, the model of like Hafnium compared to that. This is probably kind of the difference of like, this is like the Fancy Bear stuff is like, this is what hacking looks like in 2021. And the stuff that Hafnium was like, this is stuff that could be done.
It's a Perl script.
Since you can buy VPSs.
Well, and we were talking about last year, just as the first of the virtual sessions in the pandemic were kicking off, we were talking about what it means to have to deal with adversaries that have highly iterated clandestine operations infrastructure at scale, and what it means to grow entire generations of adversary operators that this is their native way of thinking about the environment. It's the same paradigm shift that comes from thinking about how folks that routinely manage large-scale botnet infrastructure versus individual ops teams going for single access on single endpoints. It's just a different predation strategy. And we've got a series of adversaries that are now optimized for very different predation, and arguably are getting much better at that optimized pathway for the effects they're seeking to achieve.
but
And
not only that,
to bring that full circle, we come back to these cyber power indexes that don't understand any of these different optimizations. We all want to put USG and Five Eyes at the top of the list because psychologically we have this fixation. We need to believe we're the best. And I don't think that that is something we can hold on to anymore.
but this stuff was completely predictable. It was 100% predictable if you did the meta-analysis properly. That's what sort of blows my mind, is that we're so far behind, even when we know what's about to happen, we still get hit, if that makes sense.
But the futures intelligence process is now completely disconnected from the way we implement and invest for defensive operations, the way we deal with crisis response processes. We're so busy firefighting the last crisis that was based off of a 10-year-old attack model that we can't get that step ahead in most of those conversations. We're not having that higher level meta conversation. We have a batch of folks actively seeking to mock the very mechanisms by which we connect with decision makers and policymakers in terms they can understand with this material. I don't talk about thicken, which is not an int, it is an analytic methodology, or any of the other scenario and futuring techniques, because I particularly like the stuff. It is a thing that works very much to engage a set of functions in a policymaker's brain that can't be engaged otherwise.
It's not just the policymaker's brain. It's also the strategist's brain, the forecaster's brain. But I do have a big question for you, because I put myself out there when critiquing a recent paper, and then I was like, I need to ask JD this question. And it is this: is persistent engagement a strategy, or is it just a description of what's happening?
So that's a really interesting thing. My argument is the first approach that is native to the environment has been developed in the environment. So in some way, it is a description of what is happening and a proposal for how to go forward. It started as a vision, and it became then a theory translated into doctrine that has been incompletely adopted and drives strategy and operational scoping at certain levels. But you've got this wonderful stack of language there that all the academics love to pick apart, love to criticize. I cannot wait for the cyber persistence theory book to come out from the original authors of the concept, Emily Goldman, Michael Fisher-Keller, Richard Hartman. I think that will clarify a lot of their thinking. I'm quite eager to see that because there's a lot of things to take the next step beyond that thinking at the operational level that need to be done as well. But we're having this conversation now over 2 years. That conversation has unfortunately been dominated by folks that haven't spent a tremendous amount of time actually thinking about it in the context of things on the wire when they critique persistent engagement. We've got a lot of folks that create a straw man, set that straw man alight, and it becomes this easy thing, therefore, to argue against.
Well, the paper I was reading was like persistent engagement is escalatory. And the way I see it is when you're fighting a jujitsu black belt, you're doing jujitsu whether you like to or not. You may be doing really bad jujitsu, or you can choose to do good jujitsu. But those are your two choices. You don't have another choice. I don't know that we have the ability to disengage. Does that make sense?
Well, this
I absolutely agree with this.
Adapting to earlier nuclear analogies. You've got the idea that you start with a period of non-use because no one wants to ever see a nuclear weapon used again. They pray God that never occurs. Cyber is in constant use. So we have the first departure when we think about persistence around the idea that there are daily operations on the wire. And it's not merely a matter of, can we deter them from never happening? This is, can you deter espionage being the current fight? We did not come into this from the position believing that that was an outcome we could achieve. You can shape adversary behaviors. You can reach tacit agreement in what is an acceptable level of pain and what is a truly unpermittable or non-permissive problem set. And you can build from that, perhaps eventually, a series of norms and even formal diplomatic mechanisms. I'm very skeptical that we will reach the latter, but let's have some optimism out there. But you get there by behavior on the wire. And right now we've effectively seeded the ground where the adversary determines all of these things by their actions. And we spend most of our time trying to say, well, we can't even think about how to react to that because we might make it worse. Well, it gets worse on a rapid scale.
So I think the whole idea of like escalatory and cyber, it's not a good approach. Like it's not a useful way of thinking about cyber, right? There's a huge amount of stuff that you can do in cyber that is just, it's normal. It's what everyone does. And then there's the like fuck with stuff that impacts civilian infrastructure and causes death. And if you avoid that, pretty much anything else is not escalatory. It's just like a day at the races. It's another Tuesday. It's completely fucking normal, right? Dropping Ode on Twitter because someone else fucking found your bug,
Okay, let me disagree with
that. That's escalatory.
Let me disagree with you. I think escalatory actions happen completely bilaterally and have nothing to do with the overall scene. And the way I'll say that is, let's say that the SolarWinds activity was not from SVR, an adversary we're familiar with, but from Egypt. How many minds would that have blown? You see what I'm saying? Like if I don't know, pick a small but very technical
2016 country. Lazarus hitting with financial backbone, right? It blew a lot of minds.
And then the fact that they dropped WannaCry, which was a complete world impacting thing. Like I think prior to WannaCry, like North Korean hackers were kind of like distinctly how it was being described as Egypt there. Like it caught a lot of people blindsided.
But what I'd love to do,
we've had a couple of years where we haven't had a new country enter the stage publicly. Not to say they haven't entered the stage, not to say we're not dealing with new players.
Oh, exactly. Like the time to address Egypt is now, before they have to enter the stage. That would be the advantage of actually doing the meta-analysis, and I forget what you call it, the intelligence. You had a word for what we're missing.
Futures intelligence.
Futures intelligence. You're like, this is broken. Something's broken. Is that the futures intelligence that's broken?
So warning intelligence is broken. Futures intelligence being setting the broader conditions to think about the problem space from which we will issue specific warning
is even more broken, probably. So I would say the advantage to fixing those would be getting ahead of these problems instead of facing them as constant fire strikes. Poor Silas. Sad.
So, like one of the things that's interesting about the recent cyber rankings paper was the attempt to look at countries that are not sort of yet on the world stage. So they included like Malaysia, what was it, Indonesia? Oh no, I don't actually remember. The thing was that I believe their analysis was quite bad for those countries. But you know, I think it was at least interesting to attempt to understand what capabilities exist within a nation that hasn't made some sort of public demonstration. And sort of how do you, and given that I think their analysis is bad, it sort of comes to the, well, how would you evaluate a country that you think it, like, how would you evaluate Egypt? How would you say that they're going to do it? Like, what are the criteria? What are the things that you would look for when building up a threat model of what Egypt is going to be in cyber?
So I think one of the problems is when you look at these large national aggregated questions versus looking at specific capabilities that have come to the forefront and the ways in which capability is generated. And you know, this comes back to the long-running conversation we have around Egypt in terms of folks got good. They got good in discrete path-dependent mechanisms that generate talent, generate these network effects, generate a incentivized community. You have to unpack those things and you have to see where they take themselves in new contexts. And it's not easy to do with large scale statistical aggregate data. You can't get there from here.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's other things as well. Like, to a degree, you need to sort of understand, like, what is their cybersecurity culture? How big is it? Right? Because that's sort of where the talent pool, well, you could just say, like, what is their computer culture? And then the subset of that is like, how hardcore are they, hardcore geeks? And, you know, who are the security people in that? Because that's your ultimate talent pool. That's what you actually want. You can't sort of just take randoms and make them into, you know, top tier hackers with, you know, 1 or 2 training courses.
I mean, this is why Iran is a player, because of like Ashiana, and I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but like, they're amazing. And the stuff that they've done and the way that they've made so many really awesome concepts, like technically applicable, and built this mentoring and training system, like it's fantastic. So,
well, and built an entire ecosystem of contractors that professionalized to some extent.
But that's also what
in these joint directed activities under an integrated concept. Now, there's a lot of competition. It's not centralized. It's messy. It's corrupt in a lot of ways. There's a lot of dynamics there that just were unhelpful to what they could deliver, because, you know, all the snake oil salesmen, all the incompetent upper management, everything that happens in the InfoSec is, but within that weird local context. But at the same time, it's generated a tremendous amount of offensive operations posture and bench. Now, is it the best O-Day development shops? No, not even close. Are they interesting in how quickly they're able to weaponize 1-days into the pipeline? How quickly they're able to move with retooling new capabilities, re-achieving some of the same operational objectives in different contexts? They're failing a lot, but every one of those failures is a learning cycle. And we're not necessarily doing as much as I think we ought to interrupt those learning cycles, to add friction to that overall pattern of evolution.
I think that's really good. And I think that's something I don't like these constant let's rank various countries things as much. But I think one thing they are trying to do is sort of broaden their focus away from just exploitation. But what you don't see them do is look at, like, try to count the different operational models that a given adversary can do, right? What they want to do is incorporate like soft power and defensive capabilities, which almost feels like a separate metric, right? Like just create a defensive metric. That would be good. But like understanding an adversary's operational tempo capability would be very interesting. Like how quickly, like looking at how the Russians were able to take in, even a very short time from we have a SolarWinds server to we have an implant specifically for the SolarWinds server that is that reliable that you would deploy it. Like I was like pretty darn impressed. Now Silas's face says he's not as impressed.
So hold on. My face, like it is not directly tied to SolarWinds, but the thing is like those capabilities are also, and like when looking at it, like regardless, like being able to weaponize something in that period of time, it's also dependent heavily on the environment you're in and the like software that you're targeting. Like, so it's difficult. And the problem I feel like in some of these cases as well is we're looking at things like SolarWinds as something to measure soft power against or measure like cyber power indexes against. But the problem is these are the extreme cases. These are one-offs and it's the day-to-day shit that is where these things need to be measured. These are the extremes.
You really want to picture the curve. You want the shape of the curve.
Yes.
We've made the curve one-dimensional, and you want the whole shape.
And my problem is we treat SolarWinds like a one-off, but it's not. It's representative of a capability, a con-op, a set of teams, a set of development and experimentation activities that are then used to routinely generate similar behaviors. SolarWinds did not come in a vacuum. SolarWinds came out of nearly 6 years of experimentation with supply chain compromises in critical infrastructure targets. This just happens to be the one that surprised folks again.
Yep, and also learning from others as well. Like there's not just like overlaps in terms of coding or anything beyond just like that's how you do this type of attack. But those are things that like they've seen.
Proliferation.
Yeah, it's the knowledge proliferation in those things. Like, so the thing is it's also tricky. Well, one last thing with this is one of the tricky thing. One last the tricky thing with this as well is when you're looking at something like SolarWinds.
Fight me.
So the thing is when you're looking at something like SolarWinds, also like because knowledge is proliferated back and forth over years between these different things or between different large scale incidents, and they've been learning from each other. Part of it as well is whoever it was that did that, like that first was the first to bring that capability into play, and it has since like continued to grow from there. So what you're comparing, like, it's not a great area to compare, and it's not. I'm not a statistician to like properly do the numberings for these things, but yeah. Do you, Rock?
I was just going to say that like didn't SolarWinds happen sort of quite rapidly after SPR started doing a lot of .NET stuff? Like it was.
What does rapid mean in that context? You know what I'm saying?
Well. So,
what's the average for a team to pick up on something new there? I would love to know. I'm not saying that there's an answer.
Yeah.
Well, and definitely it seems like they realigned new talent for that .NET set of capabilities across some of the ways in which those are generated. So whether that's rapid versus simply a new set of resources that are being tasked to the mission, there's a question mark there, I think, in the industry reporting.
And how can we get to that level of rapidity as well? Because the United States is like, we're going to build a teaming agreement. We're going to put like a prime on this. They're going to have subcontractors, et cetera, et cetera. How do we get to the level of like ability to adapt to a new environment that we need to get to? That is something that I really want to get to.
You have a large and thriving cybercrime ecosystem where the people who are entering your pipeline have learned how to do very, very rapid, like basically to be incredibly flexible and agile. They take one day, they operationalize it, and then they scale it out massively. And then they see that someone else has an innovation and they incorporate that And again, they scale that out massively, and then someone else starts copying them, so they're forced to then
And
innovate.
I don't think the
once
U.S.
more.
model of this is new cybercrime teams running rampant. I think the U.S. model of this is, how do I clear
to do
enough penetration testers that I can pull people out of the penetration testing community into my offensive teams and then cycle them back out when I'm done with that con op.
So
Like,
the,
but that does-
the one thing I've seen is pen testers are actually like they need to be trained specifically for doing operations, because a lot of pen testing is it's not similar enough to covert operations that it crosses over.
I agree, but
Don't
like,
throw them
understand.
directly into Jeremy's classes, and
yeah, that's
no, like,
that's
it
a
can be done.
solvable
It's just-
problem. Higher management.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, like it's not just about your line engineers.
But so this is one of those things, and like one of the things I've seen for years, and this is purely just my view on it, is like, especially with USG, for a lot of the like offensive cyber talent, it seems like they pull in people as they're leaving like formalized education. They move them through the pipeline. They spend years doing their thing, and then they come out into the industry. And it's basically like you like that was your time there, and it's a black box that goes away. Like there's not this recycling back in of things. So like,
we have a very poor model to bring people back in from industry. The financial incentives are wrong. The clearance process gets broken quickly. We don't have the industry 100 to have less than full relationships.
Isn't it also super expensive to get a clearance? Like I've never held a clearance, but like I've heard some numbers before, and I'm like,
there is an administrative overhead for not just the clearance, for any engagement with folks. Also, just the manner in which you're trying to arrange your talent to preclude certain other options in their career path. So therefore, they can't freelance. They can't do some of the other things, and there's some arrangements, which breaks a lot of things that make the InfoSec rock stars successful.
Plus, the ideas that get kicked around, like, you know, what we need to do is we need to stop people that being at NSA ever working for companies out of like the Middle East and whatever. Like if you've ever been cleared, then you're not allowed to work in any of these places, right? You're literally you're saying to people, if you come and you help us, we will like ruin your career for life. Like that.
Well, it's even worse,
join us,
because that's actually only part of the problem. The other part is the people you actually want are the ones with experience in the cultures that are out there. Right? I want people who speak Arabic and understand that the Saturday is like, you know, not the vacation day you thought it was.
But also those are the people that you need in these campaigns as well, because of exactly that point is like they may not know. And so if you've got a team planning a con op and it's like, okay, we're going to be conducting it at this time, and it's like, oh shit, like they don't work on that day. Like
that's important. And also the type of people who want to venture into the world are also the type of people you want. Like I always said, like we have 4 million people cleared. Are we sure that's the right 4 million? You know what I mean?
That's a
lot. It's a hell of a lot of Mormons. But, you know, like, I think one of the other things sort of from what Silas was saying is like, you know, you actually do want people that have maybe been a little bit dirty, right? Not necessarily someone that's like fucking been, you know, hacking banks and whatever, but someone who has like dabbled in malware development and has been hanging out on Russian forums and speaks Russian is going to be a really strong asset to a cyber team. But the ability to clear that person is probably nil, right? It's like, well, what have you done? Well, I used to hang out with Russian hackers. Thank you.
And I remember some of the like folks, friends of mine from years ago who went off to work for DoD subcontractors, like absolutely some of the best technical talent that I've ever met. And the thing is like I remember sometimes like there is a very deep taboo. It's like that's gonna not be okay. Like, fuck, you installed Nmap on your laptop? Fucking black hat. They're gonna yeah. Your polygraph is just brutal.
This comes back to this wonderful poem by Kipling about the two different armies, the one for the parade ground and the one for when you're actually in the trenches in the classic dun-colored problem. We have a need very much to understand that here in this new domain.
Yeah, it's a 10,000 pounds of education taken care of by an 8 rupee Giselle.
I wish we had queued up the poem by Kipling to end on. That's what that's
That's a good closing note, then.
Listen,
There you
if we're going to start planning to queue things up, I need an upgraded Zoom license. So
We'll probably have to do
So
that.
yeah, we're going to open a Patreon, and we're going to need people to
Oh, no,
tap
no
that bell,
monetization.
hit
We're gonna-
subscribe.
we'll fundraise through
yeah.
OnlyFans. It's just going to be like me doing reverse engineering. You can sit and watch me in Ida Pro for hours.
You can get screen caps. What are we working on now? And
Hey, premium subscribers get Yara rules.
I'm going to be reversing in an hour for anyone who wants to join my live stream.
That's,
Hot and
God
uncensored.
save us. I could see that becoming a business model for the next generation.
Jags and I will
Yeah.
each use half of a keyboard. We'll use one of the like
Yeah.
split keyboards, and I'll have one half. And he'll have like the QWERTY side. Ultimate
That would
coordination.
be a good drinking
Two
game.
reverse engineers playing.
Oh my god, that actually
Yeah.
would be a really, really amazing DEF CON game to play. Is how fast could you like deploy something or stand up a server with two people having to use the same keyboard at once?
You only get half a keyboard, and you have to coordinate with your friend,
Yes,
and you have to use IRC to do it.
yes. I love this.
Okay.
Now you're spawning
we
up
do have
game
to
show
wrap up.
models.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay,
I also
unfortunately, we do
want
have
to
to
say-
wrap up. It's on the hour, and thank you everyone who's joined us. We absolutely appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day to hang around and listen to us pontificate. We hope that you'll join us next time in a couple of weeks when we discuss the next set of interesting things. We've now scheduled for every 2 weeks, so knock on wood, we'll stick to that. As usual, subscribe, hit the bell, like, tweet, reshare, everything. So thanks a lot,
As
guys.
always, all opinions represent only the speakers and not their employers or any other organization.